Hey, 42 here. As you've probably noticed, modern society has something of an obsession with entrepreneurs. So much so that the likes of Elon Musk, Mark Zuckerberg, Richard Branson, Jack Ma, and Jeff Bezos get more column inches in most newspapers and magazines than your average Hollywood A-lister. Kids these days don't dream of being astronauts. They want to be tech billionaires. Keen to tap into such lofty ambitions amongst a modern youth, an entire cottage industry has sprung up almost overnight, with self-help books, influencers, and podcasters all promising to tell you that one thing that every billionaire does in the morning that'll make you rich. As if all you have to do to become wealthy beyond your wildest dreams is set your alarm for 4 AM and down a goji berry smoothie the instant you wake up. In reality, of course, there is no one secret trick to becoming a billionaire. Or is there? Well, no, there definitely isn't. But there is one thing the vast majority of the world's most successful entrepreneurs happen to have in common, including all the ones I mentioned at the start of this video. I'll give you a clue. It starts with P and ends with Enis. As unpalatable a truth as that may be to you, we live in a world where practically every famous entrepreneur is in possession of one regular-sized, standard-issue Y chromosome. According to Forbes, only about 10% of the more than 2,000 billionaires on the planet are women. But you don't have to go all that far back in history to find yourself in a time when the list of the richest people in the world would have been even more overwhelmingly male. Overwhelmingly male, but not entirely. Hetty Green was an American businesswoman who made a fortune on Wall Street in the 1800s, decades before women were even allowed to vote. Raid Shadow Legends has taken over, and gaming will never be the same again. Raid is the first game to bring a true console-level experience to your phone. They've set the bar high, and there's no going back. Recently, I've been really enjoying playing with the rare champion Judge from the Dark Elves faction. I'm also a huge fan of Turvold from the Barbarian faction. Quite simply, he's one of the hardest hitting champions in the entire game. With some builds, he can hit for over 400k damage. So, what's new in Raid? Well, they're bringing out 5 badass looking new champions that I can't wait to get my hands on. They've also brought out new skins for one of my favourite champions, Trunder Gilt Mallet, and they just look awesome. And Raid's currently running a special Deliana Chase event, where you can get your hands on the amazing Deliana, a brand new legendary champion from the High Elves faction. All you have to do is log in and play Raid for 7 days between now and July the 28th, and you'll get Deliana for free. This is the best time to get started in Raid, and you can click my link in the description below or scan my QR code here on the screen, and you'll get unique bonuses worth $30. We're talking a free epic champion, Vergis, 200k silver, 1 energy refill and 1 XP boost, and 1 ancient shard so you can summon awesome champions as soon as you get in game. All this treasure will be waiting for you here. All new players, listen up. Once you're in game, just enter the code MYDELIANA to get your hands on everything, and I'll see you in game. Thanks to Raid Shadow Legends for sponsoring this video. But being a woman didn't change how much she liked holding on to her money. In fact, when it came to parting with cash, this millionaire was tighter than your Y-fronts after an episode of Bridgerton. And that's not just my opinion. The Guinness Book of World Records named her the planet's greatest miser. As if being recognised as the biggest cheapskate on Earth isn't enough, Hetty is also commonly remembered as the Witch of Wall Street, and not just for her ability to make money appear out of thin air. No, it was a deliberately mean nickname. Because even though she probably wasn't the easiest person to get along with, Hetty was also a woman who flourished in a man's world. She lived in a time when society expected well-to-do members of the fairer sex to look pretty, smile, and leave the important things in life to the nearest man. Instead, Hetty carried a gun, cussed like a sailor, and objected to masculine control, famously making her husband sign a prenuptial agreement so that he'd have no claim on her money should things go south. That kind of thing might work for Beyoncé, but a century and a half ago, it was practically unheard of. But despite the many negative stories we're going to hear about Hetty, she actually had quite a few redeeming features. We just need to look a bit harder to find them. Hetty was born into a wealthy Massachusetts whaling family in 1834. Her younger brother died as a baby, and her mother was often ill. So Hetty spent much of her childhood living with her grandparents, and it was her grandfather, Gideon, who gave her her first lessons in commerce. He had dodgy eyes, and so 6-year-old Hetty used to read the finance section of the newspaper to him, with Gideon providing a running commentary on the news of the day, including why certain stocks were a good investment and others weren't. Young Hetty also accompanied her grandfather and father down to the docks where they did their business dealings, which had the combined effect of teaching Hetty a good deal about both the art of negotiation and the science of swearing like a sailor after half a litre of rum. She also learned her way around the business's ledgers. By the age of 13, she was skilled enough to act as her father's bookkeeper. As well as how to run a business, Hetty's father taught her how to invest, and generally how to look after money. Which is how, years later, when he transitions the family business from whaling oil to shipping cargo, Hetty would be a crucial part of building an impressive portfolio of real estate stocks and bonds. To complete this somewhat untraditional school of life education, Hetty was privately tutored and attended a Quaker boarding school. But those docs had clearly left their imprint on the girl because her Aunt Sylvia insisted she attend a finishing school in the hope of turning young Hetty into a lady. As was the way of the times, the entire system was designed to secure girls a decent husband. Hetty was said to be an attractive young woman, so her father was keen to see her marry well. He bought her a wardrobe of lovely dresses to attract a suitable, suitor. But Hetty was having none of that. She sold the gowns and invested the money in government bonds instead. Despite her best efforts, Hetty still managed to attract her fair share of admirers, and it was while staying with her father in New York after the death of her mother that Hetty met someone she admired back, her future husband, Edward Green. Green was a wealthy businessman, so at least he and Hetty had that in common. But he was fond of a high life and spending money, a passion they certainly didn't share. Hetty lived at a time when married women weren't seen as full and individual people in the eyes of the law. Women had no right to vote, and a married woman's property was legally controlled by her husband. For this reason, Hetty's father included a clause in his will that stated any husband of Hetty's wasn't to inherit the money he left to her. He needn't have worried though. Hetty had no interest in dishing out her wealth, and made Edward sign an agreement that would keep their finances separate. It would prove to be an astute move, but more on that later. Hetty inherited around $7 million from her father when he passed away in 1865, worth about $125 million today. But by her father's requirements, the bulk of the fortune was to be kept in a trust fund that Hetty had no control over. Later in the same year, her Aunt Sylvia also died, leaving Hetty the inheritance from her wealthy grandfather, Gideon. But just like her father's will, Aunt Sylvia's contained a few nasty surprises. Around half of the money, $1 million, was to be left to charity, and the rest was to be kept in yet another inaccessible trust fund. Even considering the trust fund and charity donations, Hetty had still inherited an incredible fortune. But as far as she was concerned, that wasn't the point. She'd been cheated out of what was rightfully hers, and she was going to get it back, even if doing so involved a little cheating of her own. Aunt Sylvia's will had been finalised in 1863. But, conveniently enough, Hetty managed to dig up an older copy of the document, dated 1862, in which the entire fortune was left to her. Even more conveniently, that will contained a nifty little clause that confirmed any future wills were null and void. A 5-year legal battle ensued, but eventually the signatures on Hetty's version of the will were declared to be forgeries. They must have been pretty bad ones too, because forensic analysis of the pen strokes concluded that the odds of the signatures being genuine were about 1 in 2.5 sextillion. Despite having apparently scribbled her aunt's name on a fake will in wax crayons, for some reason, Hetty was never charged with fraud. Perhaps because she buggered off to London for a few years till the heat died down, but she'd certainly learnt her lesson about the world of counterfeiting. In her future business dealings, she would never again sign her name, always asking others to sign on her behalf so that nobody could ever copy her signature and swindle her. By now, Hetty was an active investor and used the interest from her father's trust fund to grow her wealth exponentially. She invested heavily in railroads, real estate, and government bonds. And according to her, success was just a case of buying when stock was low and selling it when it was high. So that's where we've been going wrong all this time. In contrast to Hetty's style, her husband was rather more cavalier, and he made some bad investments that led to significant losses. Despite her reputation as the world's greatest miser, Hetty had the patience and generosity of a saint when it came to her husband, bailing him out on multiple times over the years. But in 1885, Edward made a fatal mistake. No doubt embarrassed about finding himself in a sticky financial spot once again, he secretly withdrew just over $500,000 from one of Hetty's accounts. The bank refused to transfer, but for Hetty, the act was unforgivable, and the couple separated. At the time, Hetty was worth around $26 million. That's $750 million in 2022. But despite wealth that most people literally can't imagine, she lived like she was on the breadline. Using various aliases, Hetty moved between apartments, hotels, and boarding houses so she could avoid paying property tax. She didn't want to rent an office, so she worked from the chemical bank, one of the companies she was invested in, where she could be found managing her business from a vacant desk, and when one of those wasn't available, from the floor. When Hetty had oats for lunch, she'd put the bowl on the radiator to save the cost of heating the water on the stove. It's also said that she saved money by requesting that only the hems of her dresses be cleaned, because those were the only parts that got dirty. Well, I say dresses. Apparently Hetty only actually had one dress at a time, which she'd wear until it basically fell apart. When her estranged husband died in 1902, that dress became a black one. And it was then that the Witch of Wall Street nickname really took hold. Probably the most widely reported story of penny pinching involved Hetty's son, Ned, who suffered a broken leg in a sledging accident as a child. Hetty initially took him to a clinic for the poor, where medical care was free, but she was eventually recognised and Ned's treatment was withdrawn. Many accounts claim that Hetty decided to care for Ned at home rather than pay for treatment, though some other sources suggest she probably did try and find alternative doctors. Whatever the exact details, Ned's leg didn't heal properly. Gangrene set in, and eventually the limb had to be amputated. Interestingly enough, Ned seems to have been one of his mother's biggest fans. He gave several interviews during the course of his life, and he painted a very different picture of the world-famous miser who may or may not have cost him his leg. According to him, Hetty supported numerous charities with sums that today would run into hundreds of thousands of dollars. She also loaned money to about 30 churches at below-market interest rates, and she paid dozens of families a regular income to help them manage their living expenses. Hetty was also very loyal to those close to her. A bookkeeper named Benjamin Lawton worked for her father before working for her, and Hetty kept him on the payroll well into his old age, even though most of his day was spent snoozing at his desk. According to Ned, the reason nobody knew about any of these good deeds was simple. Hetty believed in what she called discreet charity. She did good things because she wanted to, not because she thought it would play well with investors, shareholders, and the press. In the early part of the 20th century, a financial crisis known as the Panic of 1907 shook Wall Street, wiping 50% off the value of the New York Stock Exchange in the space of just 3 weeks. True to form, Hetty saw the crash coming. And not only did she safeguard the bulk of her fortune from the repercussions, she also had plenty of cash on hand to loan to those in need. Most businesses in America lost money during the Panic of 1907, but Hetty only got richer. So rich, in fact, that during the worst of the market crash, she actually bailed out the city of New York with a massive loan. Over the following years, she, a private individual, would become the city's largest lender. Hetty finally cashed in her chips in 1916 at the age of 81, with an estimated net worth of close to $5 billion in today's terms. That made her easily the richest woman in America, and very probably the entire world. In many ways, it's hard to know what to make of this remarkable woman. For the most part, history seems to have remembered her as a bit of a villain, and her outrageous stinginess was, admittedly, pretty unforgivable. After all, the best thing the ultra-wealthy can do is spend their cash to help the economy. But it does her memory a disservice to focus only on the negatives. This was a woman who flagrantly ignored the oppressive sexist customs of her times to do things her own way. A woman who played the men of Wall Street at their own game and absolutely obliterated them while she was at it. And most of all, a woman who deliberately chose to keep the many good things she did for her friends, neighbours, and the city to herself. In the days when doing a good deed is only worth it if you can immediately post it on social media, I think that's pretty cool. Thanks for watching.